Hello friends, my name is Yevhenii, I'm from Ukraine. I'm watching my video using this service, since my pronunciation of the English language does not allow me to do it myself. Thanks for understanding.
The 572nd day of the war between Russia and Ukraine continues. Yesterday, the head of the presidential office, Andriy Yermak, published a photo with Ukrainian fighters from Klishchiivka, signing it "Ukraine always returns what is its." From these words, many concluded that the village south of Bakhmut had been liberated. However, the Ukrainian military, which is fighting in Klishchiivka, did not confirm this. The press service of the Rage Brigade, the banner of this brigade is held by the military in the photo, reported that active assault operations are continuing in Klishchiivka. Today we cannot confirm 100% control over the settlement, the brigade's press service said. Later, another video appeared with Ukrainian fighters from Klishchiivka, in which they declared that the village has been taken. There was also a message about the liberation of the settlement from the commander of the ground forces, Syrsky, as well as from the head of the press service of the Eastern Group of Forces, Yevhenii. In turn, Russian military telegram channels and speakers claimed that fighting for Klishchiivka and Andriivka is still ongoing and positions are changing hands. According to them, the Ukrainian Army controls part of Andriivka, as well as the south and part of the center of Klishchiivka. It is interesting that this morning's report from the General Staff of Ukraine does not say anything about the liberation of Klishchiivka south of Bakhmut. The defense forces continue assault operations in the Klishchiivka area of the Donetsk region, inflicting significant losses on the enemy in manpower and equipment, and consolidating their positions on the achieved lines, the General Staff said in a statement. This was not reported in the previous evening report either. At the same time, President Zelensky confirmed the liberation of the village yesterday in his evening address. Let me remind you that at the end of this week, the command announced the liberation of the neighboring village of Andriivka. But judging by the footage published by the Ukrainian armed forces, the village has been essentially wiped off the face of the earth, and it is not entirely clear how to establish control over it. Today, the Ukrainian armed forces raised the flag over the recently liberated village of Andriivka. The message from the General Staff says that the village, although it was liberated by soldiers of the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade, is now under constant shelling and attempts by the enemy to storm it. Despite this, it was important to raise the Ukrainian flag here. This means that Andriivka completely came under the control of the Ukrainian armed forces. In the area of Andriivka and Klishchiivka, there are dominant heights south of Bakhmut. This explains the fierceness of the fighting for these settlements, which has been going on since May. As for the northern flank of Bakhmut, the Ukrainian army has made no progress there recently. The front is in place, which calls into question the implementation of the plan to cover Bakhmut even if the Ukrainian army on the southern flank is able to advance beyond Klishchiivka. On the Zaporizhia front, battles continue at Robotyne, Verbovy, and Novoprokopivka. Ukrainian military telegram channels write that the matter is complicated by the introduction of Russian reserves to this section of the front. Russian telegram channels write that the Ukrainian armed forces are making their way to Novoprokopivka, while the Russians are counterattacking their flank from Kopani. By the way, the 47th Magura Brigade, fighting in this sector, has had a change of command. According to Ukrainian media, Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Sak was removed from his command post. Instead, the brigade will be led by Colonel Alexander Pavly. Let me remind you that in early June, Magura was the first to attack Russian positions in the Robotyne area, but suffered significant losses in people and equipment in the very first days of the counteroffensive and did not achieve a breakthrough of the Russian defense line. In July, Brigade Chief Sergeant Marcus resigned in scandal. The brigade was equipped with Bradley infantry fighting vehicles and Leopard tanks, and its men were trained in the West. Meanwhile, Russia has strengthened its defensive positions in occupied Tokmak in the Melitopol sector, British intelligence said yesterday. Additional checkpoints and anti-tank fortifications are being set up around Tokmak, which is about 16 kilometers from the front line, and new trenches are being prepared in the area held by Russia's 58th Combined Arms Army, the UK Ministry of Defence wrote, citing an intelligence report. Tokmak is preparing to become the core of Russia's second main line of defense, the report says. In the Berdyansk sector, relative calm has established in the Novomayorsky area, which the Ukrainian armed forces recently tried to storm. Ukrainian telegram channels write about the difficult situation in this area, and the Russian units fighting there claim that they repelled a multi-day onslaught on Novomayorsky, but lost several landings, which they are now firing at. In general, they write about a decline in military activity. One of the most important topics in the Western press continues to be the Ukrainian counteroffensive and its immediate prospects. Several optimistic comments about the prospects for the offensive appeared in the German media. Former CIA chief David Petraeus told Deutsche Welle that there are high chances that Ukraine will be able to develop a counteroffensive. He said Ukraine's military faces perhaps the most difficult challenge any army has faced since World War II, due to powerful Russian fortifications and drones. At the same time, he said, the Ukrainians are doing an excellent job, and there is reason to expect that they will be able to continue their slow but steady progress, widening the breach and moving through the second and third lines of Russian defense. The question that arises for me is, when will the Russian defense crumble, burst at the seams? And when will the Ukrainians be able to use this to reach at least the point from which it will be possible to hit an important line of communication along the southeastern coast of Ukraine? If they can achieve such a point and damage or destroy the logistics capabilities of the Russians to support their forces in southern Ukraine, then this will already be a significant achievement for the Ukrainian troops, says Petraeus. American military analyst Michael Kaufman spoke on the same topic in an article for Spiegel. He says Ukraine's counteroffensive is entering a decisive stage and is approaching its final stage, as both Ukraine and Russia have committed their reserves to the front. And now the question is which side controls its forces better. If the Russian army turns out to be too exhausted and does not have additional reserves that could be thrown into battle, this could create a dangerous situation for the Russian military at the front, the expert writes. In his opinion, in this case, the Ukrainian armed forces will have a chance to completely break through Russian defenses. I note that the thesis about the exhaustion of reserves in the Russian army as the main condition for the imminent collapse of the Russian front and the success of the Ukrainian offensive is often found among both Ukrainian and Western analysts. However, it is still impossible to say exactly how true this thesis is and what the actual balance of forces and reserves of the warring parties is. In addition, if Russia's reserves are indeed running low, the Kremlin could announce a new wave of mobilization, thus solving this problem. In addition, there are other assessments in the Western media. The Wall Street Journal, citing a Western official, writes that the Ukrainian armed forces will have to switch from an offensive to holding their current positions by the end of October amid worsening weather conditions. The publication notes that the worst weather conditions are expected in November and December, when roads will be washed out and then covered with snow, making it difficult to use heavy equipment. I note that the other day, U.S. Chief of General Staff Mark Milley gave another 30 to 45 days for active hostilities in Ukraine this year. The Financial Times concludes that the Ukrainian army will not have quick success. 3 months after launching the counteroffensive, Zelensky and his government are faced with the reality that they have failed to achieve the decisive breakthrough they desired and are now preparing for a protracted war, the article says. Among Ukrainian officials, there is now a more realistic view that the war will be slow. The question is whether Ukraine's Western supporters are willing to support the country in the long term. Ukraine has so far returned to a campaign of attrition, wearing down the enemy with artillery and destroying supply lines with long-range strikes, while simultaneously using small infantry attacks. Ukraine's strategy has had some success, but without a sudden Russian collapse it will be slow at best, the Financial Times concluded. Analyzing the reasons for this situation, the publication names the position of the West, which was unable to properly train Ukrainian troops and also sent them to storm powerful fortifications without air support. The idea that Ukrainian troops, without any air cover, would break through Russian positions has always been more of a Hollywood plot than reality, the publication writes. The Financial Times also cites assessments of the Ukrainian military, which criticized Western approaches to training. "If I had only done what the Western military taught me, I would be dead," says Suleiman, commander of the 78th Special Forces Regiment. He said he trained with American, British, and Polish soldiers, each of whom gave some good advice, but also bad advice, such as how to clear trenches. "I told them, guys, we're going to get killed," Suleiman said. At the same time, Russian forces continue to learn from their adversaries and adapt their tactics, whether by dispersing supply lines, increasing the use of drones, or fending off Ukrainian attacks. So the situation came to a head, into a clinch where neither side has a decisive military advantage. A Western official told the publication that in such draining conflicts as this, economies win wars. Obviously, the war of economies can last a very long time. And in the West, actively promote the thesis that the conflict is protracted. Yesterday, the NATO Secretary General called for preparing for a long war in Ukraine. According to Stoltenberg, most wars last longer than expected when they started. He also opposed the truce and ceasefire. The peace agreement should not serve as a respite for Russia to attack again. "We can no longer allow Russia to jeopardize security in Europe," the Secretary General said. At the same time, according to him, NATO strives for a quick peace, but not at the cost of the disappearance of Ukraine. Stoltenberg believes that Ukraine will eventually be in NATO. Friends, considering what is happening in my country, this channel is now my only source of income. If you are able to support me financially, I will be very grateful. Thank you very much and see you in the next video.